Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of Ranching Reboot, the podcast that reboots your thinking about farming, ranching, food systems, and the people that operate them. I'm your host, Brian Alexander. You can find me on social media as Red Hills Rancher. Support for this podcast is provided by my awesome patrons on patreon.com. If it wasn't for you guys, I might have stopped doing this a long time ago. Your support keeps me going. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you'd like to join the ranks of my amazing patrons on patreon.com, just head to patreon.com/redhillsrancher or click the link in the show notes. Some of you guys aren't quite into sending money on the internet, and that's okay. There's some other ways you can really support the podcast, and one of the best ways to do that is to leave us a review on Apple or whatever platform you use. You can also share or repost the clips that I post on social media. That's a great way to support the podcast. A few weeks ago, my dad and I were talking, and he brought up the USRSB, or U.S. Roundtable on Sustainable Beef. And I realized I didn't know a whole lot about them, and neither did he. But then I thought, hey, I have this podcast thing. That would be a great way for me to reach out to the USRSB and see what they're all about. While their website can be a little overwhelming, when I went to the leadership page and I saw the chairman look like one of us, that was pretty encouraging. So I reached out with an email, and now here we are. My guest today is Mike Williams. Mike is a seasoned rancher based in the desert and mountainous regions just northeast of Los Angeles, California, like there's a Los Angeles, Nevada. With extensive experience in running cattle operations, Mike manages a blend of cow-calf and stocker cattle on a ranch that spans elevations between 3,000 and 5,000 feet. Mike has also developed a direct-to-consumer beef marketing business dedicated to sustainable ranching practices. He's actively involved with the USRSB, advocating for better ranching practices and continuous improvement to the beef industry. Mike's practical and adaptive approach to ranching reflects his commitment to maintaining and improving land and animal welfare. Guys, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Mike Williams. We get into the USRSB, what it's all about, what they're trying to do, at least on the cow-calf and producer side. Can't really speak to a whole lot about what they're trying to do the rest of the industry. It's obviously a very complex issue. So I guess we'll get into it. Please welcome Mike Williams to the show. Mike, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. Thank you very much. How are you?
Glad to be here. I'm good. Thank you.
So, well, why don't you get us kicked off a little bit and tell us a little bit about your operation and where you're at?
Well, we run cattle in a ranch just northeast of Los Angeles in Los Angeles County. It's high desert country, technically mountainous. It's probably lower end of our elevations, just under 3,000 feet, and we go as high as just over 5,000 feet. Fairly rugged, but there's some flats and different kinds of country. Mostly cow-calf. We do run some stockers. What I've kind of started doing is when I'm able to, and the drought doesn't, is we run a few less cows than we typically would, and then we try to hold our calves over when we have the feed, but then we have the option of selling them when we have a really bad drought. And so that's a large part of what I do. I do have a small direct-to-consumer marketing business done mostly through a website that I got set up, and then we will sell halves and wholes through a custom butcher. We have them processed through a custom butcher, not too far from here, where they'll buy the cattle from me, and then we'll arrange for the harvesting, and then they'll pick the meat up at the butcher.
Okay. Let's back up. Let's talk about you. How did you get into ranching? Tell me about how you grew up and how you got into ranching.
Well, I grew up, my folks moved to town when I was little. Both my dad and mother were farming or ranching backgrounds, and they moved to town when I was young, but I still spent most of my summers, or a lot of summers, with my grandparents, where I really developed a love for livestock. and knew that's where I wanted to go. But then I worked as a cowboy for a while towards the end of high school and out of high school. But then a lot of people at the time would caution me that if you don't inherit a ranch, that you'd probably better do yourself a favor and just get a job, because you got a better chance of playing professional football than starting a ranching operation from scratch. Because I knew that's what I wanted to do. But these were well-meaning people that thought they had my best interest at heart.
What
and
time
I believe
frame was that?
this was in the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
And to be fair, ag beef in particular was going through a pretty tough time right then.
Yeah. Early 80s was not a good time for anybody in ag, much less to be buying anything. I think some interest rates were close to 20%.
Oh yeah. It was pretty hard on pretty much anybody. But so that, like I say, these people were doing me favors, and maybe in hindsight they did. It kind of pushed it out a little bit for me. But finally, after being in the military and then working some time as a horseshoer, I decided that I'd take a stab at it, and started with I'd landed kind of down. I originally come from Idaho, is where I grew up, and
Okay.
then I kind of ended up out here in California, shoeing horses out here in the greater LA area, and I started with 10 steers. Talked a guy into letting me he was north of, kind of in the mountains north of in Ventura County, and he was running stalkers up there, and I talked him into letting me put 10 head out on him. He was running like 1,500, and so my 10 head didn't make a difference, but I think he thought that if I had 10 head there, I'd be watching 1,500 steers as close as I were my 10. So it kind of worked for both of our advantage, and then just taking advantage of opportunities and different things that come along from there. And we've managed to kind of put together it's not a huge operation, but it's big enough to kind of keep things together for us.
I read a little bit online about the ranch you guys manage. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, the ranch we're on now, we leased it from a development company, but it's about 12,000 acres. Again, it's mostly high desert kind of country. We get most of our rainfall in the winter, all of our rainfall pretty much in the winter. And you kind of get what you get as far as feed goes for the year. And then you got to swing back in until you come into the next year. It gets a little cool up there in the wintertime. I mean, nothing compared to a lot of the country, but it's just something you got to be aware of. It delays the grass coming on some years a little bit. So you got to kind of be careful of that.
What kind of grass are we talking about? Is there, and I ask this of almost anybody, is there anything that you could point to on that property and say, that's native range?
There's grasses that are native grasses, but I don't think I've been able to, at least so far, been able to get something that probably looked the same as it did 100 years ago, or 200 years ago. I am working through some different kind of grazing management to kind of rehabilitate some of the perennials and grasses and different things that used to dominate this country out here. With some success, that's kind of undertaking that can happen overnight, but
Yeah, for sure.
But that's kind of what we aim towards, to try to rebuild some of those native grasses, or at least encourage them in different areas.
I guess what I want to say now is California, especially Southern California, has a much, much longer history of, I don't want to say human habitation, but let's just say like New World, colonial, that we can, what am I looking for? Like, it's got more of a history it's got a longer history when, European colonials came and started to disturb the ecosystem and interact with the natives than say the Great Plains do. Like here in
Sure.
the Great Plains, we were kind of limited by the Comanches till, 1860s, 1870s, and also to a large part by the Civil War. But like the part of California where you're in, there's places there that were settled, way before that, 1800s, and even back 1500s by the Mexicans and the Spanish, right?
Um, I'm not sure it goes all the way back to the 1500s in California. I don't know exactly, but for some reason I was thinking they come up here in the early 1700s. The Spanish missions and stuff. But I could be wrong about that. But whenever it was, they've been here a while. And go ahead.
And I think what I was getting at was, some of our observations in the Great Plains, are just from a very, very limited window. Like 1850 to 1870 is when a lot of the observations on the plains were made. And I think that's a pretty narrow window. But we also have a pretty decent idea of what the native species were like here on the plains. And I'm wondering if we know what that is, if people in your area know what that native plant community would have looked like, or if there's just been, 300-400 years of colonial disturbance and bringing in new plants and new organisms, if there's anything that looks like native range left.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And I know they have some idea based on this. The Spanish kept pretty good. There were pretty good records of what they found and what they had, and documented the plants and the species that were here and the fish, and when they saw the fish and the different native populations. So there's those missions had pretty good records of what they saw. Now, to the extent that you could build a model of what a range would look like, I don't know how complete that is, but I know they have a pretty good idea. It was dominated. There were a lot of perennial grasses out here, all over at the time. And I used to have a lease ranch there more closer to the coast and we caught a lot of that more coastal weather that would have been a lot more inundated with those early Spanish mission cattle. And so, a lot of the discussion around them was that cattle had transformed that rangeland from perennials to annuals. But I think one of the things that's important to think about is that the perennials are really good plants in a lot of ways, but the annuals aren't all bad either. And so, especially if you're when you're running cattle, you're mimicking nature to an extent, but you're not going to replicate nature. So you got to incorporate a lot of different ideas into or at least my opinion is, you got to incorporate a lot of different ideas into your management strategies and what you aim for. And annuals, maybe you don't want your pasture to look like it did 1,000 years ago, because you're trying to support production at a level beyond what elk and deer would require. So, I mean, I don't know how that all fits in. I don't think anybody does, but I think it's a process that we go through, that guys like you and me go through on a yearly basis, is trying to figure out what's the best thing that I can do for my land and for my cattle with the resources that I got. And increasing, when you're all annuals, increasing perennials is definitely a thing, but I don't know that you need to make a goal of making your pasture look like it did 1,000 years ago necessarily.
And I can agree with that. We have no idea what it looked like 1,000 years ago. Things are changing all the time. Animal populations are changing, shifting, and growing, migrating. Kind of back to what I was getting at earlier, a lot of the observations we have of the Great Plains are of a very, very narrow time period. And we're looking at a system that's like, that had undergone a period
a previous period of massive change, rapid.
Yeah.
You know, depopulation of the natives, extirpation of the beaver, extermination of the bison. Like those three things had to have a massive effect on the plains ecosystem.
Sure.
And I don't think there's any way that we can understand the way things function back in the past, back in antiquity. We can only kind of see how they're functioning now, maybe make some inferences as to what's broken, try to make a little tweak and see if it's better in a couple years.
I would agree with that 100%. Yeah.
I got to ask you, I noticed that grazing chart over there on the wall.
Oh, yeah.
Where'd you get that sucker at?
Oh, that's the one they sell at Ranching for Profits for.
Okay, where's that dinger at? Wrong button. Anyway, when did you go to Ranching for Profit?
I haven't yet, but I do plan on going. Okay. I've been to a workshop and it with not Dallas, but
Dave.
Yeah, he come out and did a workshop here for us a couple years ago, and we wanted to do a grazing management. It was part of a pilot project I was doing through the USRSB, where we tried to incorporate grazing management practices and some other metrics as far as improving ranchers' operations. And anyways, in that process, he talked about this chart, and it's been about the closest thing I found to being able to keep track of that grazing as far. So I'm not a full-on alumni ranch for profit, although I intend to be.
We won't hold that against you. I promise that I won't anyway. I don't know what anybody else will do, but I won't hold that against you. Yeah, Dave, I had the privilege I've known Dave Pratt for a very long time.
Okay.
He's a great man, great educator. And Dallas just has so much positive energy that he brings into the classroom and his facilitation style. It's really infectious and really powerful. Well, I've been twice, probably should go again. Probably need to get back involved in Executive Link just so I have some accountability other than to myself. But you know, I think it's a really great program, and I encourage everybody to go.
Sure, I can see. I mean, I've seen some of the videos on YouTube, and like I say, I've had this workshop, and I haven't been through it. I can see the value in it. It's just a matter of getting it done.
When you go, I'll give you one piece of advice. There's a very strong temptation Monday afternoon to go hang out at the bar with all your new friends and have a few drinks. Tuesday's economics. So just be ready to have a fire hose stuffed in your mouth full of numbers first thing Tuesday morning if you go to the bar Monday night.
I can only imagine. I've read his book. In fact, I got it right here, the turnaround, where they get into some of that. So I can only imagine what that's like. Yeah.
So a few minutes ago, you mentioned the USRSB, which is one of the things that we kind of want to talk about today. So what is the USRSB?
USRSB stands for the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And what it is it's a cross-sector organization where organizations from ranchers, producer organizations, as well as other sectors, of the supply chain, feeders are there. You got packers there, and retailers. You also got those sectors. Then you got civil society, which includes the educational institutions and NGOs like Nature Conservancy,
okay,
and World Wildlife Fund, WW Ducks Unlimited. There's several of those. And then you got your allied industry, which includes companies that sell products to the beef supply chain, like Elanco and Merck and companies like that. So you got across sector, all sectors involved in beef, the beef supply chain, kind of come together, and you and to discuss the sustainability issues facing beef. It's been in the organization for, I think, about 15 years now. And in the process, we've developed a definition of what sustainability means in what they call the beef sustainability framework.
Okay.
Where you've kind of defined, indicate what we call high priority indicators. There's a lot of different indicators of beef sustainability, but things like air, land, water, efficiency and yield, I'm kind of missing a few, employee safety and well-being, obviously. But you try to hit the different things that impact beef supply chain in various ways, and then we try to decide which of those issues we want to focus on first, and those are kind of the indicators we came up with. And then we talked about metrics, like what kind of things would make a difference at each sector of the supply chain, and to improve the sustainability of beef. And then so now we're in the process of setting some goals to improve beef sustainability, and then how do we go about making like incremental, continuous improvement in ensuring that the beef supply, we keep our resources, we're able to continue to produce beef. We have the resources without degrading the resources, and still advancing the ability for people like you and me to make a living doing it.
Okay, great stuff. There's quite a bit there to unpack. So how does the USRSB define sustainability?
I know I probably should have a more concise way of expressing it, but basically it's environmental, being able to produce beef in environmentally responsible, socially acceptable, and profitable way. So I think that's a canned definition, but essentially it's, as I said, being able to produce beef into the future without degrading the resources that we're using today. Preserve that ability, I think, when it comes down to it.
And I think that's great. We got to eat. Everybody got to eat. There's more people every day on Earth. Population keeps going up. We're not making any more land. I mean, okay, volcanoes make a little bit, but
not
cows on that right now.
Right.
Maybe in 10,000 years, when it gets some topsoil and some biology, maybe we can grow on that. But for the most part, there's no more land being made. There's really no more land being put into cattle production. There's a lot that kind of seems to be taken out for whatever various reasons. If you go down to Texas, there's a lot of house farms down there where there used to be cow farms. And I'm sure the same story close to where you're at. To me, though, when I hear the word sustainability, I kind of have some issues. And, you said the USRSB came about like 12, 14 years ago, and something like that. Sustainability was a big buzzword, and it still is. But I feel like sustainability is not good enough. I feel like sustainability says we're just going to maintain this current system as long as we can, and maybe not necessarily improve it. And okay, so that's kind of a semantic thing. That's kind of playing with words. What to get to a place where we're not degrading our natural resources, right? I mean, I think that's a great goal. And that's one of the that's one of the keystones of how I manage my ranch. Do not want to degrade this resource. I want this resource to be here and be productive and be healthy and, long after I'm gone. But it seems like there's sectors of the industry that don't want to change, that want to hide behind, well, we've got to feed the world. We've got to do this for efficiency. We got to do this for profit. We got to do this for whatever reason. And okay, I'm talking about feedlots. I think feedlots are gross. I don't think it's very healthy for an animal to be standing in its own feces and urine and be breathing dust all the time. I just don't think that's a healthy environment to raise food. My personal opinion, I still like a grain-fed steak, grain-fed burger. I like grass-fed too. But when I look at the beef industry as a whole, I look at the feeding sector and I say, that's where we could really make some big strides. That's where a lot of things I think go off the rails, is in that last 3-4 months of the animal's life cycle. You're a cattleman like I am. Like, the best thing in the world is to go out and see your cows with brand new baby calves this time of year on green grass, right?
Oh, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
And it bothers me to see cattle standing in a mud pen, eating out of a concrete bunk behind steel bars. I get it though. It's efficient. The grass-fed doesn't scale. It's not available all year. There's availability concerns, there's production concerns, there's a lot of variability concerns. I get all that. But I see the environment we put these animals in a feedlot, and then I see what we're feeding them. We're feeding them number 2 dent corn, and we're feeding them soybeans, which a lot of those are grown here in the Great Plains, off up into Nebraska and into Iowa. Well, in California, don't you guys have to import like 70 to 80% of your grain-based cattle feed?
We have to import most of our feed. I don't know I don't know what percent, but it's a lot. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm getting at here is, inadvertently, there's a lot of, environmental degradation going on because of monoculture farming. To grow the number 2 dent corn and grow the soybeans, alfalfa, and the cattle feed to feed the mega dairies and the mega feedlots. And it's odd that that's not being addressed, or maybe it is, and I'm just not seeing it.
Well, it is. I mean, there is some, there is, like, for example, first of all, the change in the feed industry. I don't know that I'm 100% on board with you about all the problems with the feeding industry. I mean, I'm not saying there's not problems there, but I don't know that they're as bad as that. I mean, I don't feed and I don't know all the details, but I do know that if you gave a lot of my cows the choice of eating hay out of a bunk or climbing that mountain every day to find a blade of grass and coming back down to water and those kinds of things, that a lot of them would probably stand there at the bunk and be quite content. So again, I don't know that that it's the same as putting you or me behind bars with an all-you-can-eat buffet. It's maybe for them it's more like Club Med, where you just go hang out. You got all the water you can drink and all the food you can eat. I don't know. I'm not going to, but regardless of what you think about that, it's still the system that we currently got.
Yep.
And it's without that, it would change your operation of my operation it'd make things over time maybe better, but in the short term, it'd be a little bit difficult because there's no way I could raise as many cattle if I wasn't selling, if it wasn't for the system as it's currently.
And I agree. It's a totally valid point, Mike. Right? That's a totally valid point. Gosh, I'm thinking of something one of my friends said on our Discord server the other day, and he said that the Model T and tractors had to catch some responsibility for the rise of the feeding industry, the rise of the cattle feeding industry. Okay, so 100 years ago, everybody was doing agriculture with horses.
Right.
We invented Model T cars and tractors and like just a little over 100 years ago. In the span of 10 to 15 years, 80% of the horses were retired. There had to have been a vast, everybody was growing feed for their horses, right? I mean, that logically you would grow feed for your horses.
Right.
So now all the horses are gone. We're growing a lot of extra feed. And we can transport it easily. So why don't we just put our cows in these pens where we used to keep our horses and feed them the horse feed and get our cows fat on that since we got all this extra feed? It kind of makes sense. I mean, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, what you're describing, I think, is what sounds like a lot what happened, generally speaking. You also, to your earlier point, you also increase the pounds that you can harvest off of the livestock, and especially when grain's cheap. In fact, I think it was somebody said one time that it was the low grain prices really that made people start wanting to feed that to cows as opposed to selling it for food. And I, the whole history, it seems to have gone that way. And the way it went, there's guys that could probably go into the details on that a lot better than I could, but it's kind of the system that we got, and things tend to go in ways that are more efficient. And, and so you get a good carcass of beef, you get, more pounds per the amount of resources, theoretically. I mean, these calculations have been done. I don't know, I can't, repeat them, but the amount of resources it takes to finish a carcass in a feed yacht. And again, I'm not advocating for that. I'm saying, and I don't, and to the point, to go back, the Roundtable doesn't advocate.
We're saying
feed yard over grass. We're saying that there's advantages to feeding, and it's where we are, and these are the advantages that you get through a feeding system, and the benefits of that. If you prefer the advantages for a grass finished animal, whether it's for the health benefits or for the uncertainty about the products or the hormones or the different things that you get, then that's another option that has its own set of advantages and disadvantages as far as, but leaving that choice open, I think is really important. But we're not going to be able to produce near as much beef if we take feed yards off the table, as it were.
Right. And I get that. And I'm not saying that feedlots are going to go away. I think maybe that we should maybe do feedlots a little bit differently. But I don't think that I'll ever see the end of confined animal feeding, as there's just too many people in the world. Honestly, there's just too many people in the world, and the machine that we need to feed them is just, we almost can't understand. It's hard to wrap your brain around, when you have 4 freezers full of beef, and you've got a few customers and like, oh, okay, we'll give you some ground, give you this. All right, maybe next month I'll get another animal to process or to top off my supply. It's an entirely different thing when you're trying to supply just one restaurant in a small town versus trying to supply a chain restaurant across the country, or dealing with a client like Walmart.
Right.
The bigger the client is, the more they're going to want consistency, the more they're going to want a fair price. And I get that. There needs to be consistency to the product. And having a consistent grass-fed product that you can get to harvest weight or get to finish in a good amount of time, those genetics are in extremely short supply.
Right.
The genetics that will do okay in the pasture and do well in the feedlot that has a lot of commercial appeal to the packers, there's a lot of those around.
Right. Well, that's what's been the main supply for a lot of years. So there would naturally be as the market for grass finished beef increases, I imagine you'll start seeing a lot more of those genetics surface. And that's a trickier thing to do, because even if you take genetics out of the equation, producing a consistent grass-fed product is challenging, even with ideal genetics.
You can have the best genetics in the world, Mother Nature will still screw you.
Exactly. So, yeah. But the good thing is the people that want grass finished products tend to understand that and are okay with that. They're looking for something beyond just the texture. The flavor of grass finished beef I've always found good, but they're looking for something beyond that prime beef that you would look for it out of a finished grain finished carcass.
What's usually on Mike's table, grain finished or grass finished?
Well, I like grain finished the best, but I kind of tend with, like, if there's a half a carcass left of something that I didn't sell, if that could be an old hamburger cow, or it could be a grass finished or grain finished. I kind of end up with whatever doesn't get sold. Sometimes I'll have a half a carcass left over, and then if I were just go out and if I have something purposely to kill for myself, I'll have it finished on grain. I got a guy not too far from me that finishes cattle. I know him. I know how he runs his operation, and so I'll work with him to get a grain finished thing. But I'm not afraid of the stuff in the grocery store either. Don't misunderstand me. I can get a little cheaper this way, but I'm not afraid to buy a tri-tip at the grocery store.
Okay. It's probably been 3 years since meat from the grocery store has even been in this house. I mean,
yeah,
hot dog.
I get that. I get the concern. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay, where do we want to go from here?
Well, I'll just back up, but something like I say, as far as sustainability, your point is very valid about the amount of feed, the amount of land, and the way that's all farmed. As far as the overall sustainable picture of food production in the United States, and how much of that goes to beef is something that is on the radar of the USRSB. It's not. We have a what they call it, the Feed Sustainability Task Force, where we have some people from our organization working with some farmer organizations to discuss the issues involved in cropping in farm, that kind of agriculture. But our primary focus is more on the stuff that's directly in the beef supply chain. It's on our radar, but it's not our primary focus at this time.
because I guess the feed growers are going to be upstream of the actual beef supply chain. There would be suppliers into the supply chain.
Right. Right. And so, like I say, it's on our radar, but it's not our primary focus. We are involved in some groups and conversations that talk about that stuff, but it's not our main effort. We do talk about what it takes to make feed yards, well, all sectors, like whether it's the cow-calf, stocker sector, the feed yard sector, what practices make them more sustainable, like nutrient management type of things, animal welfare concerns that you addressed, that you mentioned earlier. Those kinds of things are something that we do have some metrics on and do have some discussions about, for sure.
So the metrics are the things you measure, the targets you're trying to hit. And I noticed that's like, if you go onto the USRSB's website, which is probably usrsb.org.
Palm, I think, maybe org. Yeah, you'll get there. Yeah.
I'll get a link in the show notes. You guys will find it. So they have links to self-assessment tools. And I went through the one for the cow-calf pasture guy. And I think I can't remember if it was like 88 or 94% that I scored on a self-assessment. Like there are a couple little dings, which, they're kind of the same dings that I got from Food Alliance, from Blue Nest. And okay, I accept that. And I did that a couple of weeks ago, and some of the questions were just kind of like, okay, well, this is pretty basic. And I just wonder what sustainability looks like for a feedlot, like what that self-assessment tool looks like for a feedlot. Maybe I should have gone through it.
I haven't taken it. But I do know that it involves like a nutrient management plan. I know that's one of the things that they discuss. They also discuss animal welfare, the BQA certification, things like that are mentioned. But I'm sorry, but I can't speak any more closely to what their tools are. I've not being one, I didn't really focus on it very much.
Yep, same reason. I didn't look at it. I'm not a feedlot, so I'll click on this one and do this one instead. And
Right.
I get that USRSB, it's a large organization with a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of stakeholders involved. How did you get involved with it?
Well, it's kind of funny that my initial concern and skepticism was probably out higher than most producers that might be catcalling. I couldn't hardly say the term sustainable without spitting. It had been used as a club against ranchers for years.
Okay.
To try to dictate how we should run our operations. And at the time, I was the second vice president in the California Cattlemen's Association, and I'd read something about this USRSB thing, and I thought about how a bunch of nuts out there just trying to figure out a way to tell me what to do. And then it come to my attention that California Cattlemen's was a member of it. And I'm like, wait a minute. So I was there was an NCBA deal down in San Diego, and they had one of the side meetings was on this USRSB thing. So I went to it, and I was comforted in that meeting somewhat at the conversation that was going on there, that it seemed to be, there were some producers there, that they weren't, like, as far as I was at the time, would consider a sellout to cow-calf guy. You know what I mean? They were working on trying to make this something that made sense. But I went to the executive vice president of the California Cattlemen's Association, Billy, and I said, well, who's keeping an eye on these? We're members of this. Who's keeping an eye on these guys? And he says, well, we had a guy that was going, but he kind of got sidetracked and busy. He says, do you want to do it? Well, no, but somebody needs to do it, and so my involvement initially was more to keep an eye on things and to make sure that this organization didn't go in a direction.
Was it one
that
of the
would
things keep your friends close and your enemies closer?
yeah, that was kind of it. I felt that this needed to be kept an eye on, and then if we could just try to make sure to do to the best of my ability that it doesn't go in a direction that I felt would harm the cow-calf producers. And I wasn't, I started participating in the meetings and going to the different things. And what I found was that, I mean, there were other people there besides me, other producers there besides me that had the same interest.
Sure.
And just first of all, let's just keep this from being something that's going to harm producers. And I think that we were very effective in doing that. So then it starts to turn in, well, how can we make this into something that can help producers? How can we make, instead of this being a negative thing, now we've got an opportunity to make it into a positive thing. And I really think that we've been able to do that in a large, well, we've been able to make it so it has potential to do that. Well, and I'll, like, for example, when the issues that were brought up, a lot of on environmental issues, air, land, and water, right? What's the one thing that whether you want to talk about carbon in the atmosphere, whether you want to talk about water quality, whether you want to talk about species diversity, what's the one thing that a producer can do that affects that the most? Manages grazing. How he manages his grazing has the most impact on all those things. That also happens to be the exact thing a producer needs to do to produce better forage for his cattle. In other words, if you look at the metrics, like a grazing management plan is something that's pushed through the Roundtable, that a grazing management plan is something that every producer should be looking at every year to improve his own operation for his own profitability, his own land improvement. And so through that process, we got buy-in that producers producing better forage is something that every other sector of the supply chain looks to, and to whatever degree they think they need to support producers in supporting their sustainability goals, like whether it's McDonald's and Walmart, what can they do to help producers support their sustainability goals, help producers find resources and knowledge that better help them better manage their pastures. And so if you look at the metrics of the cow-calf sector on that template, there's not one that doesn't just equal better ranching practices across the board. So
I would agree.
Yeah. So essentially, we've defined sustainability across the industry as what it is. Sustainable ranching is just better ranching. And what we didn't do is we didn't try to put do this or you need to do that concept into anything. Where you're at, right? You take where you're at or where Joe Blow's at, and you don't, or me, and I don't have to make my operation look as good as yours. I just need to make my operation, try to get it a little better than it was last year.
Right.
And likewise for you. It's not about minimum standards or anything like that. It's about a continuous improvement, gradually and continually improving your operation as you have the resources and the knowledge to do so. And then to the extent that we can, we help facilitate the opportunities producers have to get those resources and to get that knowledge. So that's the angle that the approach that I have in mind, and the organization of the Roundtable has in mind, especially at the producer level.
Okay. And I think that's all great stuff. But, again, that's great for the cow-calf guy, which, that's who we are. I still have questions about what's being done, in to address feedlots, to address the feed going to the feedlots and the environmental problems with that. And I guess, let's be honest. If it wasn't for feedlots, do you think the animal rights activist would have an argument? I mean, and let's lump in hog and chicken barns in there too.
Well, I don't know enough about hog and chicken barns I do know a little bit about feedlots. That I think that the pictures that come out of feedlots can have a negative impact. And I do think there are some poorly run feedlots that contribute to the narrative. But there's some well-run feedlots. And if you've been on one of those, my concerns to that extent are modified a great deal. There's some poorly run cow-calf outfits where them range lands are getting, it's not they're getting grazed down to dirt continuously.
Well, they
all
don't
the time.
have a grazing plan. They don't know how to manage their forage. They just put a few cows in the pasture and go look at them a couple times a year.
And those guys would give ranchers like us a bad name to environmentalists, the way a poorly run feed yard would give an animal rights person some heartburn. So I don't know that I'd be ready to cast rocks at feed yards just because the environmentalists want to target them. That's while some of their criticisms are fair, they're largely exaggerated, and I don't have a lot of confidence in the criticisms of a lot of the environmental groups that go about. But to your point, poorly run feedlots are abusive to animals. I would agree with that, and there's no place for abusing animals as far as I'm concerned.
And I agree with you 100%. But I kind of want to say, I think I want to believe that everybody in the industry is like that we don't support animal abuse at all, that we want the job as quickly and efficiently as possible, that's safe for people and safe for the animals with the least amount of stress possible. They're living animals. They're going to do unpredictable stuff. And we're people, and we're subject to emotions. And with almost every crew that I work with, whether we're, running cows through the chute or branding calves, I'd say that the stockmanship, the corral work has gotten so much better since the mid 80s.
Oh, I would agree.
Yeah. Wow. There was some, I grew up watching a lot of poor stuff, poor stockmanship, some kind of brutal horsemanship. And I saw people do things to cows that if I saw somebody do that to one of my animals today, we'd go behind the pickup and we'd have a conversation about it. Right.
Right.
But I mean, things are getting better, but still, there'll be an uncooperative animal. And maybe you got to be a little bit rougher, get her head turned than you could. Those things happen all the time when we're all working cows. And I'm not completely innocent of never losing my shit and maybe being a little rougher than I need to. But I recognize that, at least, and I try to minimize that. And I think that's I think that kind of concept is why a lot of feedlots have gotten a bad name from animal rights activists. Is they might be there for an hour and see a couple hundred head run through, but that one that gives them problems, and the one guy has just had a bad day, maybe had a fight with his girlfriend, and he snaps and does something that doesn't look cool on camera, then they've got their shot. Then they've got a picture. And, pictures don't often tell the whole story. They can tell a lot of a story, but not the whole story. And I think that's what gets missed a lot of times is we don't see the forest because we're looking at a leaf.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And the whole process that you outlined, I mean, that's kind of been my journey. I had a real similar journey in how I worked on a lot of outfits early on in my life. And then what I tried to do now is definitely, and the awareness of the stockmanship and how that affects your herd and is I think a lot higher now than what it ever was. But, and your point about they do take pictures out of context, and you need to be on your game for that, for sure. But I think most people can recognize when something's being taken out of context, when a video is being used as propaganda as opposed to an actual documentary. And some people get fooled by it, but I don't think it lasts very long. Overwhelmingly, people tend to trust farmers and ranchers and believe that most of us are trying to do the right thing. So I don't think those environmental groups have had near the impact with their videos and different things as what they would have liked to have had.
I think maybe a lot of those are just trying to fundraise in their own echo chamber.
I think that's right.
So, where does the USRSB get its money, and what do you guys spend it on?
Well, we're basically a dues funded organization, and the dues are somewhat progressive. A producer like you or me, it would be a $500 a year membership. If you're a retailer, your dues would adjust varying on how big of a retailer you are. If you're in a $1 billion company, the dues are quite high.
Walmart pay a lot to participate, but Joe's Butcher Shop doesn't.
Exactly. And I think feeders are similarly scaled. I'm not 100% certain about that. But other allied industry or companies, they're scaled based on up to so many million of revenue. Your dues are this much. Up to another so many million, your dues are this much. That's all on the website. That anybody that wants to look, and the dues structure is all laid out so that there's no question if somebody's joining what they're going to pay. So that's the primary sources of our funding. What we and that's mostly takes up our basic operations, meetings, different things like that, as well as what we try to do is some initiatives like the self-assessment tool, the modules. I don't know if you had a chance to look through those. We developed a grazing management plan template that somebody that wants to start a grazing management plan can just put us on his template. So some of our budget goes to that. We don't have enough of a budget to do a lot of that stuff. And so, as I said, because some of these other companies, McDonald's and Cargill and some other organizations like that, have identified, like, let's say the grazing management plan as a way for them to advance their sustainability goals by increasing the number of ranchers that have grazing management plans. They'll give grants to advance that grazing management plan module, for example. We partnered with another group on trying to understand what is it that motivates ranchers and farmers to have grazing. Well, what we wanted to try to do, because we set a goal to increase the number of acres under grazing management plan in the United States, one of the things we needed to know is what's the current state, what are producers currently doing? And in the process of that baseline, we also collected some data as to why, who's doing it, who currently has them, and why they have them, who doesn't have them, and why they don't have them. And so we could get some insights that way to better communicate, to know who we need to communicate with and what resources we need to provide. And so these companies also help donate. They donated through grants some money to help facilitate that expense. So different projects that we identify that will be helpful in advancing sustainability, we try to put money towards that. And then what we don't have, if it's worthwhile, then we also can get some donations, things like that.
Okay. Like, one of the things that let's just say somebody wanted me to poke about was deliverables. And I'm not sure what that really means in this context. It's kind of put to me to ask whoever I got to talk to with the USRSB about what are some actual deliverables that the Roundtable can point to, and some targets that have, or maybe some targets that have been met and that are still in progress.
Well, that's a good and that's a very fair question. And whether you or your friend, don't be afraid to poke any way you want. But and because that is a good question. What are we actually doing to advance beef? And I think the first step that we accomplished, as I mentioned earlier, is we managed to coalesce the industry around a definition that is pro good ranching practices. So once we got that in place, then we said about, well, in order to, if we decided this is good, then how are we going to advance these good by, so we set some goals. And the goals is, and so this is where your actual deliverables would come in, is like one of the goals we want to advance the number of lands under a grazing management plan. I forget the exact numbers, but the significant amount. We want to get more producers doing better grazing practices. Now, what better grazing practices means,
it means different for me than it does for you.
Exactly. So we're not dictating what better grazing management. It's the idea is if you just start, and that's why we settled on the metric that we use is get the plan going, because if there's a plan going, that means you're thinking about it. That means you're probably measuring something, whatever you think's important in your area, and however you think is best for you to measure that. And so once you start measuring something, then you're going to start looking, well, how am I achieving that? So the idea is if we can get people started planning and incorporating those concepts into their ranching operations, we're going to improve their land and water resources. That's the idea. So our deliverable to start with is we got the goal, and that's goals isn't delivering, but what we're going to, by a certain date, we're going to our goal is to increase the number of grazing management plans. And in doing that, we're working with, like I said, we just kind of got our baseline set, and then we're working with industry partners, in groups. We're working with the retail supply chain partners in order to help bring the resources and the knowledge to ranchers. Another thing we're doing is we're looking at where we're at with the science and what where the gaps are in what we understand as sustainable, and what we know and what we don't know. We're meeting with we're partnering this fall with a group, farmers, FFAR, farmer, and anyways, it's a group that looks at the science, the state of science in agriculture.
Okay.
And so I apologize, I can't remember these acronyms off the top of my head, but they're a recognized in group as far as scientists and academics that we're going to work with them in identifying the gaps of knowledge in where we're at as far as grazing practices, as far as genetics, as far as the different things that can advance sustainability in beef, what we understand, what we know, what we don't know. So we're trying to get a handle on where we're actually at with the science on that. That's one of the things we're currently working on. We also have developed what we call a program. It's a program recognition. The USRSB does have a program, a sustainability program per se, right? We're not going to certify somebody as you got a sustainable operation or you don't, right? We're not going to decide that. We're going to leave that to market and people to promote their businesses and to adjust their practices. What we do have is a program where we have a third party to where somebody does have a program that they want to say is sustainable or whatever. Maybe they don't, but they want to know if it's sustainable. They can apply to be recognized as in alignment with the sustainability framework. So basically what that would say is you have the program and how you bringing your cattle through the supply chain, and maybe you're just a producer that's going straight to the consumer, and you want an outside body that has done some work on this to identify for those that might not otherwise know that you're in alignment with sustainability framework. And so you can do that, or if you could apply to be recognized, your program to be recognized as in alignment with the framework that we have, if that means anything to you or not. But that's an opportunity for companies to do that.
Okay. I think it's the more that I've listened to you talk and the more that I've thought about it, encouraging people to have a grazing plan seems like something that's just basic.
Right.
And I don't know if it's just me. Every once in a while when somebody says, "What's a grazing plan?" I'm just flabbergasted. Like, you don't know what a grazing plan is? But what are you doing? But I get that there's just a lot of people that the term grazing plan is kind of a foreign thing for. And it is the right place to start, because if we can just get you to manage your land just a little bit better and see the benefits of that, it just, once you kind of get started down the road, pasture management and managing your rest periods and your graze periods, and you start seeing the benefits on the range,
right?
I don't think anybody goes back.
No, I don't think so. I mean, you can't. Once you started down that road, and you start realizing the benefits, the benefits motivate you to keep getting better. I mean, you got to manage your expectations, I think, to some degree, and that's why you don't try to bite off more than you can chew. I know I've seen people kind of do that, and then they get a little overwhelmed. And then they fall kind of back a little bit. I've seen that happen. But as long as you manage your expectations of what you can do physically and financially, and focus on incremental improvements, nobody. It's in fact, it's hard to slow people down once they get started down that road. One of the biggest challenges, because I run into this when we did that. I was trying to recruit people to go to that little grazing management workshop that we did with Dave Pratt, and I particularly can think of one person that, when I was trying to encourage him to sign up for the program, and it was like a deer in the headlights. Like, well, what are they going to expect me to do now? If I go there and if I learn something, I'm going to have to come out of my comfort zone. This is an older couple and they were fairly established in their deal. But
how do you mean ranching for profit? There's no money.
Well, we've kind of been brainwashed into thinking things like that. I think it's so much nonsense that but we've kind of heard that, and I don't think that. I think that mindset is detrimental to our industry. Here's the thing: when you can take this concept in sustainability, it is, because I've heard a lot, and it's not and it's a valid point when you bring up sustainability to a ranch, particularly somebody that's been, maybe they're the fifth generation on a ranch, and they'll talk about how I've been here for 5 generations. Is that not sustainable? And that's a valid point. It is. It has been, for sure.
Well,
but
if when your great grandpa got the land, if you had shoulder deep grass and no trees and running water in your creeks, and now your grass is maybe ankle deep at best, it's half covered with cedar trees and all your water's gone, have you been sustainable?
Well,
managed to sustain a ranch operation, sustain a lifestyle for yourself.
Well, and not only that, but there's nobody ranching the same way today as they did in the 1870s. I mean, I don't know, maybe there is, but I don't know anybody. And in the 1930s, they were ranching different than they did in the 1870s. And in the, 1950s, and we're not ranching the same today as they did, well, when me and you in the 80s, when I started, for sure. So changing and adjusting, using the technology as best you can understand it, the understanding of how to manage grasses. As these new things come along, adapting and improving is a must if you don't want to be the one that loses that 5-generation ranch. You need to be on your toes and paying attention to all the opportunities and all the knowledge and all the resources that come down. Because if the idea is beyond us, and in 50 years, they'll be looking at things that we couldn't even conceive of right now, I imagine, at ways of managing their pastures and things like that.
It's probably
yeah.
In 20 and 40 years, the guys running our property will be looking at us going like, man, those guys didn't know anything.
And they'll probably be right, but based on what they know at that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an idea of always looking to improve, to do your best with the resources that you got, I think is the way it lays out.
And I agree with that. And I want to loop back to the word sustainability. The root of that is sustain, which means we're just going to keep that here and maintain this current state. I would like things to improve. I would like things to be getting better.
And I won't argue with that. I mean, like I say, we could try to play around with whatever word makes the most sense, but I think that's the word we got to use in this context. And it's a word that's there, and it's something we've been able to work into this system. I mean, but your point is valid. It's not just about staying the same. it's about improvement. And if you don't get that, well, maybe the point is you're either going forwards or you're going backwards. And so in order to sustain, you need to improve, I think would be a fair way if you to say that maybe. But your point is well taken and understood.
And the reason I kind of keep I don't want to say beating on that, but I guess I am kind of beating on that is that's the name. U.S. Roundtable on Sustainable Beef. But anyway, I'll leave that alone. I'll just go ahead and drop that.
Okay. I don't know how else to answer it, but I do agree with you that it's about improving for sure.
You didn't name the organization. You can't change the name. We're kind of stuck with it. It's been there for a while. And, 12 years ago when it was started, that was the conversation. I mean, in 2012, that was the conversation, was sustainability. It wasn't until probably, I would say 2014 or 2016 that I really started hearing the term regenerative replace sustainability.
Right. And to I don't know if did it replace it or it just add something to it. I don't know. I'm not really certain. I've heard different definitions of regenerative too.
For me, like regenerative supplanted sustainability in the context of my operation, right?
Uh-huh.
I don't want to just sustain the current screwed up state that things may be in. I want to try to actively make tweaks to make things better that I can observe on a relatively long time scale, at least long time scale for a human being, which is 6 months.
Right. No, that's a fair point. And it's what I would have considered when I would talk about sustainability. That's what I would be meaning probably, is that improving what you got is, again, like I say, if you're not improving it, you're wasting it. But like I say, the name's the name, and I'm, we're kind of going. I think it does the purpose of what it's meant to do. In other words, it brings that topic across the supply chain in a way that a lot of people can kind of understand it. And then you can incorporate regenerative, how whatever, like I say, as that means to you or as that means to somebody else, would definitely be part of that. I don't see why that wouldn't be incorporated in it. You're probably at a fairly strong level in how you're producing your operation, but then you got the other guy that maybe he just started on this journey and just not doing more damage is the first step he needs to do, as opposed to, and then once he stops the bleeding, so to speak, he can start working on improving.
Once we stop the overgrazing and the underresting.
Exactly. Let's start there. Let's stop doing damage for those guys that are at that level. And the guys like you that are at a more advanced level, well, what's your next step? What's your, like, to your point with the regenerative, how do you improve this or how do you improve that based on where you're at? It's
or what is an improvement?
Or what? Well, and that's a perfectly valid point. Sure.
I'm sure there's a lot of folks that thought they were improving the world when they came out to the plains and planted trees in the 30s.
Right. Or tilled up all that wonderful sod that was growing some amazing pasture.
I'm sure it seemed like a great idea at the time.
Right. And that's a very valid point that I think we need to, as producers, and that we need to be aware of, is what are the long-term consequences of what we're doing, for sure.
Man, this has been great stuff, Mike. Man, I really appreciate your time today.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
I'm not quite running off yet. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you personally or learn more about your ranch? And then where would you want people to go that have questions about the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef?
Well, the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef has a website, USRSB.com. If you want to learn more about let me look here and see if I can make sure I get that. You do it here. Org. It's USRSB.org.
Okay.
And you can get some information there on some of the stuff we talked about. If you want to know more about the framework that I spoke about, what the metrics are and what the indicators are, that's at beefsustainability.us.
Okay.
And that'll open up the framework and kind of get you what we put into it, so you can see, well, when we talk about a grazing management plan, what do you mean? Because we keep it simple with a grazing management plan, but then we also filled out some stuff about things that you want to consider as you're developing your grazing management plan, and what that means in such a way that whether you're in Georgia or whether you're in Nevada, it's broad enough, and it's not telling you what to do, but it's giving you things to think about and how to incorporate them, how they might apply to your operation or whatever. So there's some information there, and there's also, like I say, if you go to that USRSB.org and go under the resources tab, you saw them modules and stuff, and there's also that grazing management plan template. If for somebody that's just kind of trying to figure out where they're at and how they're started, there's a development module along with a template they can download, and you can just start filling in some blanks, because there's no way to tell a guy how to graze his outfit, or how to manage his outfit for that matter, because it don't, like I say, there's not only a difference between Nevada and Georgia, there's a difference between me and my neighbor.
Oh yeah.
And part of that's the land, but part of that's just our resources. Like if you got a full-time job and trying to run some cattle on the side, or if you're a full-time land manager,
or if you own the place versus if you just lease it. I mean,
exactly.
Those are totally different mindsets.
Totally different mindsets. Or maybe you're pretty handy on a horse, or maybe you like to do things with a ATV. Either, there's different abilities of different people. So how you manage your operation is a very individual thing, but there are some overarching things or overarching considerations and principles and ideas that if you incorporate them, you can probably start seeing some improvements in your operation.
Okay.
So those are a couple places if people have questions. People are welcome to reach out to me. If they want to talk to me, I can give you my email, is at mbw61@aol.com. And I'm happy to talk to anybody. My website is where I market the cattle that I market is diamondwcattle.com.
Okay.
So that probably wouldn't help any producer too much, but with information, but I don't know.
Got a little following kind of in LA on the podcast. So,
okay.
Make sure that gets in there. I mean, just before we sat down to do this, I was kind of, going through a few questions and doing some background. I looked up where Acton, California is, and turns out you're kind of like in between three friends. But aren't ranchers.
That's fun.
Ranchers. So I'm going to make sure that they know that they can come.
Oh, good.
Diamond W Cattle Company and get good beef.
Okay. Well, good.
Because I can't ship that far.
Yeah. Have them reach out to me for sure. If they're looking, I'm out of beef for this year, but we can dang sure get them on the list for next.
Okay.
The way I do it is I'd like to harvest all my animals at the same time.
Yeah.
At this time of year, because that's when they're the fleshiest. Other times a year, it's not going to be near as good a beef as, like when you talk about grass finish, there's a certain time when they're fat and happy, and there's other times when they're a little leaner, and it has an effect on the beef.
I would be looking at late July to early October, depending on how the year goes. But kind of my harvest would open in later July after
Right.
on good green grass for 60 days. And as long as that good green grass lasts, I mean, that harvest window is kind of open, but when it quits and turns off and you don't have any more green, you got to kind of slow that processing schedule down, because your meat quality and your animal size is going to start going down until next year.
Right. Sure. So, yeah, but, that's a good place to get a hold of me. Any of those options can get a hold of me, or check out the Roundtable stuff.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and you've made me feel better about the USRSB.
Well, and here's the thing to anybody that's listening, including you yourself, is if you got questions and particularly concerns, then I would encourage anybody to get involved, to come to some meetings, to see it like the way I did, see it for yourself. Because, well, there's three things to that. One is, if we're off the rails and you think we're off the rails, then you have an opportunity to say so. I mean, obviously in a way that's not going to be terribly offensive, ideally, but if you got some better ideas, there's an opportunity to present those ideas, and if they're good ideas, you might even get listened to that point. I mean, it's an open process. It's an open organization. Our meetings are public,
and it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, just cattleman to cattleman, when you look at the list of who's involved, and then you go to the website and you look at the leadership page, their names on there that, like, there's some guys on there that I've known for a long time. Hugh Aljo, Jeff Goodwin.
right?
Known those guys forever. And I know where they stand. And then I see some of the industry partners that from my perspective has some pretty predatory practices, or promote some things that I think are maybe going in the wrong direction. I see them listed on the partners, and I don't want to name any names because I don't want to get in trouble. And I was a little concerned because, Walmart's got some money, and generally what Walmart wants, Walmart gets. And
well, they don't necessarily get it at the Roundtable. They're on there and they're a partner and they have a voice, but their voice doesn't count for any more than mine does, or yours would if you were there, or Hugh or Jeff, or it's a Roundtable. Walmart isn't running it. And to be honest, I think I wasn't there at the very initial part of it, but the story is, and again, this is the story that was related to me, so it may be gossip, it may not, is that some of those big retailers tried to get organized in a way and impose some of what they considered sustainable practices onto the industry. That was what they had in mind, that they were going to decide what's sustainable and they were going to figure out a way to impose that on producers. And you could only imagine about how far that effort went. I mean, it's obviously not still existent. So what a lot of people realized is it was a topic that needed to be addressed. And you got players from all over the beef supply chain. So you put them in a room and you arm wrestle and do various things to decide how are we going to address some of this stuff. And again, it doesn't matter if you're Cargill or McDonald's or Walmart, you had a voice, and then I had a voice, and other producers had their voices. And so we kind of coalesce on everything, and we don't have to agree on everything. Like, you don't have to agree on some of the stuff in the feeder sector, but you could have input in through that process. See, one of the things when we developed these metrics, as far as what we could do to improve sustainability, it was producers that developed those metrics. It was packers that developed their metrics, and it was retailers and they developed their metrics. And then you'd come up with these metrics, and then you'd come back together with the whole group, and then everybody would push back on you. And
So the group would have a chance to challenge the metric
exactly
said you wanted. Because look, if I'm a company like JBS, who has kind of a little bit questionable history to begin with, and I say, well, these are the metrics that I'm going to hit, somebody needs to be able to challenge those, because
right.
if we don't allow those organizations, those people to be challenged, well, you're just going to write the rules where it's really easy for you to follow.
Right. And that's what the process was. Everybody could challenge. And then you also had some environmental groups in there. You had the academics in there. So everybody was challenged. At the end of the day, the sectors defined their own metrics. They took the challenges, and either they defended them or they improved them.
And they're
based on the
reality
challenge.
by the rest of the industry.
And they were what?
And it gets a reality check by another.
Right. Exactly. And then there was a comment period for those people that weren't participating to chime in, and then those comments were addressed. And there was a process we went through to try to make it as universal, but yet as practical as possible, a useful tools and useful metrics. Are they perfect? I don't know if they're perfect, but I think they're a pretty good start.
I don't think anything's perfect. I think it's, but I think you're right. I agree with you. It's definitely a good start. Getting people to do grazing plans, that's a great start. But then it comes down to self-auditing.
Right. And I'm 100% about self-auditing. I mean, if there's marketing programs that you want to get to advance your bottom line, to maybe get more for what you beef, that you want to voluntarily participate in an auditing program, I'm all about that. But I don't think anybody, the person that can best audit their operation is the person themselves. They know the bottom line. You can, I don't want to say fake an audit, but auditing programs have their limits. Well, and here's the thing is, to your point, we were talking about how grazing, a guy who learns how to do better grazing wants to do better grazing. Let's suppose that I just went and decided that because there was an auditing program that I was going to have a grazing management plan, because they'll pay me 15% more for my cash if I have one. There's not a program there, but let's say there was. So that encouraged me to have a grazing management plan. It's a economic calculation in my mind. And so what happens as soon as that goes away, I do the minimum I can as far as a grazing management plan, write it down on paper, stick it on a shelf. I show it to the auditor, you know what I mean, or whatever the minimum is. I get my 15%, but when that 15% goes away, my interest in grazing management goes away.
Right.
But if I'm implementing a grazing management plan because I start to see the changes in my pasture, nobody's got to come to me with well, you need to improve more. I'm going to be like, what can I do to improve more? So the USRSB isn't about auditing anybody. We're we're about, well, it's especially at the producer level, we're about helping ranchers be better ranchers, whatever that means for them, you know.
I think that's awesome. And like I said, you've really made me feel a lot better about USRSB, and getting to know you over the last couple hours. I think I feel better about the where that organization is at, where they might be headed with a guy like you.
Well, I'm glad I could do that, but don't hesitate if you got some concerns. If you ever have concerns, to reach out to me, and because maybe if we're getting off track, maybe we need to hear about that too.
Yeah, and get involved. You know, if you're, I'm not a joiner. I'm not much of a joiner at all. But if you want a voice, you got to speak up. You got to go to the places. You got to go to the places where the people are assembled that need to hear what you have to say.
Exactly. If you want to have input, you got to input.
Yeah, you got to participate.
Right. Exactly.
I think that's a great place to end. Mike, really
All right,
good
Brian.
time.
It was a pleasure.
Oh, for me too. Oh, okay.
Good.
Have a great week. We'll see you.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for this insightful episode of Ranching Reboot. We appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider sharing it with your network, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also find video versions of the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. For more information, to submit guest suggestions, or to connect with our community, please visit our website, www.redhillsrancher.com. Thanks for listening, and remember, it's not just about ranching. It's about rebooting the way we think about the land.